Podcast Wydziału Historii Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego.
Historia na dwa głosy.
Hello again. We are at the podcast of Faculty of History, University of Warsaw. Our today guest is John Freeman. Hi, John.
Hello.
This is the second podcast we register in English, but the first one with the English native speaker. You are British. Can you explain what is the reason that you arrived to Poland for your research?
Well, there's a few reasons, in fact. So my area of expertise, as it were, is looking at sort of East Central Europe, but it's kind of in the early modern period, and its connections globally, specifically to the Atlantic Ocean. So I work at the University of Warsaw for the Centre for Global History, which is basically trying to sort of build up the study of global history, not only in Warsaw but in Poland. And for me, that's very, very useful as a methodological thing to consider, especially when I sort of join it to my interest in East Central Europe, the Baltic Sea in particular. So this was kind of a nice coming together of my global interest and my Polish
so
interest.
we'll dive soon to this precise area of your expertise. But first, to explain it clearly, that you arrived to Poland to study global history.
Yeah.
That sounds paradoxical. For Poles, especially.
Maybe I've heard this said to me a few times, and as well, given my interest in the Baltic Sea, a lot of people ask me why I'm not in Gdansk as well. So yeah, but this is kind of what I'm about, really, is looking at the ways in which we can find global history in unexpected places. And also ask why is it unexpected to find global history in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, and in Poland. And global history is a sort of growing field, still growing from its sort of origins at the end of the 90s. But it's also kind of growing in its weird to say, in its geographic scope, seeing as the globe is the globe.
But how can you explain to our audience what do you mean by global history? Is it a history of the globe, or is it just international of the widest scale, the history of every continent, people everywhere? Or what are the definition of doing history in a global way, or global history instead of mixing on different areas?
Yeah, so global history is not necessarily looking at the history of the entire world or the entire globe, although people have tried to do that. It's really a sort of a notion of kind of playing with the scales of our historical inquiry, and to sort of break out some of the kind of categorizations that are often very prominent in history, but particularly a sort of a national view of history, and to sort of look for the kind of comparisons, the connections, the sort of complex interactions and encounters that people throughout history have had from outside a particular locality. So
global is just opposite to national.
I wouldn't say that, but it's often put against this kind of national way of thinking, just because the national way of thinking has been so persuasive in the last few decades, and in fact the study of history has been very, very influenced by national institutions. So we can, for instance, look at the ways in which say movements of people have gone across borders. We could look at the ways in which a sort of for instance, very, very localized means of production have been influenced by large-scale markets or large-scale demands from other places. How we can look at sort of environmental changes in different parts of the world and how that's affected.
So a big variety of approaches, just
Indeed,
having not a local focusing on the closed area. It's just putting it in a broader sense.
In some way, it's kind of an experimentation of scale, an experimentation of space, and trying to redefine that in a way that's kind of useful and in a way that sort of is mindful of all the different sorts of causalities that might be at play.
If I caught it correctly, you said that your interest is focusing on the Baltic Sea and Northern Atlantic Ocean, right?
Yes.
So you are a sea historian?
I dabble. I dabble with the maritime space. Baltic Sea and seas in general are quite an important part of global history and the sort of the lexicon of global history almost, because you have this sort of concept of flows and fluidity. The sea is it can have borders. The Baltic Sea, for example, has a sort of kind of choke point near Denmark, between Denmark and Sweden. So that's a kind of a border. But generally, sea spaces, maritime spaces are very difficult to kind of have walls around. So this is quite a good analogy for what global history is about, because especially in the early modern period, you have this whole thrust of Europeans exploring the oceans and this sort of thing, and encountering places and cultures and environments and flora and fauna that they've never seen before through the vehicle of the ship.
So the sea as a place or space of interconnections, not about the border, just on the other side of the sea, something different. But we have the sea. This is the way we can communicate by sending ships. Right?
It's a facilitator of connections, and which in a way that you might not necessarily think, because
so now we have internet. They had seas.
yeah. It's sometimes difficult to think of it in that way, because humans aren't so very good at swimming. The sea could be seen as a very big boundary to human activity, but actually it's something that before the internet kind of brought the global into people's minds, brought all sorts of different things together, and transported people and goods and food and diseases through vast spaces.
Mm-hmm. So, and does the Baltic Sea create any particular interesting aspect in the global history research? Is it unique, or is it just unexplored?
I think the Baltic has often been sort of peripheralized in global history, because it's not a vast ocean. It's quite an enclosed space, so it's maybe on the margins traditionally of what people have thought in world and global history. But to me, it is an important agent in this story, because you have particularly my interest is looking at the goods of the Baltic Sea, which have been very, very important.
Goods from the sea?
Not necessarily
like fish,
from the sea.
Amber?
Fish are important. Amber is important. Amber is a sort of kind of item of interest that has been seen as very valuable in various different places. But we kind of think of, to use the best example, ships are built of wood, of rope, and you need tar to sort of make sure that there's no leaks. All of this sort of stuff comes from the Baltic Sea region. So the Baltic Sea region is actually a very, very interesting and crucial place in the early modern period for oceanic travelers to get supplies to build their ships. Yes, and the Baltic Sea is on a very practical level the way in which these goods travel around, get to Western Europe, for example, or anywhere else. So it is an important sort of agent in early modern global travel and sort of globalizing processes that happen in the early modern age.
So you said that building ships, obviously they needed wood, but is it local from the regions close to the sea, or is it just imported from other, for example, in Poland, part of Poland? Because we have in memory that through the Wisła River there were a lot of shipment to the wood toward the Gdańsk. So, or is it just local woods which are offered wood for shipyards?
No, rivers are very, very important in this. Even until sort of 19th, 20th century, the river network is very important for transporting timber. The Wisła, or the Vistula, is how you say it in English, is very, very important. I also work a lot with thinking about the Daugava because I work a lot in the sort of Eastern Baltic states region. So these river networks are sort of kind of, if we look at the Baltic as the periphery of the Atlantic, which you can, and that might be argued, then the sort of river systems are also a sort of periphery of the Baltic, and it all sorts of connects together through these sort of water systems.
Mm-hmm. And you said that the main interest of yours is located in early modern history, so 17th century, if I'm not mistaken. Why this century is more appealing to you than medieval or 19th century?
For me, the 17th century and sort of the wider, longer early modern period is of interest because it's sort of a time of big sort of change which is relevant to global history. As I said before, you have this growing awareness of the wider world. That there's discovery of what's in the Americas. There's discovery of Pacific territories. There's a sort of opening up of Asia, which kind of leads to all sorts of different cross-cultural encounters. And it's a very sort of transformational age where sort of places in Western Europe, like England and the Netherlands, stop becoming sort of backwaters and become extremely, extremely relevant. 17th century in particular is when Northern European actors become much, much more involved in oceanic travel and oceanic trade, including people around the Baltic Sea. So that this is the sort of and it's sort of the time 18th century things are kind of becoming more sort of entrenched. Colonial systems, which then later turn into imperial systems, becoming a bit more formalized, whereas the 17th century is still in some ways quite a dangerous sort of experimental time for colonizers and for them to work out their relationship with places across the ocean and likewise for sort of indigenous and non-European peoples to work out how they deal with all these new arrivals.
Okay, but as we used to study in schools the 17th century colonialism, just especially the French and Brits who just Spanish fleet go around the world, but did ships from Baltic Sea participate in this long distance routes and across Atlantic or others, and were the people in the Gdańsk or Tallinn or Riga aware of a new world in the 17th century?
Yeah, So my main topic of research looks at sort of Baltic Sea colonizers, and there's a few different groups who try to directly colonize. So the main ones are the Danes and the Swedes, but you also have the ventures of Brandenburg-Prussia. And what I focus on is the Duchy of Courland, which is this vassal state of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's sort of located around sort of southwestern Latvia nowadays. And even though it was incredibly unsuccessful as a venture, this is an attempt from the Baltic Sea, from the Eastern Baltic region, to set up fortresses in Africa, to set up plantations in the Caribbean, and to even engage in sort of spice trades in Eastern Asia, to engage with slave trades as well. So you certainly have this acknowledgement and this scope of people's thinking in the Baltic Sea region, and of course, like beyond the sort of direct colonialism, there's people, for instance, from Gdansk, investing in trades that are relevant to colonial endeavors. I talked about sort of the timber of shipbuilding, but also you have there's a lot of really good research out there on linen produced in sort of Silesia, which is shipped out from Gdansk, which is actually very highly sought after in Western Africa and is used in the slave trade. So there's certainly 17th century. There's a broadening of people's horizons, and people are thinking in more kind of global terms as an opportunity.
I found what you said interesting and optimistic in two ways. First, that let's say not Poles, but people who were within the large Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were active in the global system of colonial activity, but optimistic is that it was unsuccessful.
Yes. There's a sort of odd subsection of some historical writers who kind of are somehow quite, I guess, titillated by the fact that there's sort of Poles in Brazil, or oh yes, the Latvians were in the Caribbean, etc. You get some Polish articles every so often in sort of online magazines saying sort of like claiming this Courland history as Polish, which for various reasons is somewhat a disagreeable stance. But I like it in that at the end of one article, they kind of decided that Poland the Polish state at least didn't have much of an influence, and at the end they said, well, at least we don't need to be blamed for that yet. But yeah, it's a very complex and messy and controversial history of colonialism, which is ever present in sort of my mind as somebody from Britain, but is sometimes difficult to articulate in ways that are sensitive.
Mm-hmm. What kind of sources do you examine in your research? Are the archive in different places which deal with the activity through Baltic on ocean, or is it just a variety in different places? Or what kind of text do you read?
So a lot of the texts are coming from port environments. So I read through, quite a few sort of dry financial records and this.
Fascinating, if it is not boring.
So you often have to have quite a detailed eye for that. You read sort of kind of notary documents and that sort of thing.
In the 17th century in Gdańsk, were they kept in German or in Polish?
In German.
In German. This is what I suppose.
So the great majority of my work is done in German. Because I have this kind of Courland interest, a lot of it was run by the idea came from the Duke of Courland, so that I look at the ducal records also in German, because you have this Baltic German elite. But from the trading aspect, also, it's very, very useful to go to places like Amsterdam and The Hague, which is the center of a lot of this trading interest. Amsterdam is a huge entrepot for bringing together goods across the Baltic and the Atlantic and also the Indian Ocean. So I read a lot of things in Dutch. You can also find a lot of diplomatic material that is relevant. I particularly look at things from England, from German cities across the Baltic, and from the Netherlands, because my language competency is directed in that way. But I've also found quite a few things in France and in Portugal and Spain that relate to this history. And it's very, very useful to have an open mind and to look in different sorts of places and be creative, not just to look at the sort of financial shipping records or look at, the colonial plans that are being come up with in the sort of the Ducal Palace or whatever, but to look at sort of people's diaries and people's sort of accounts from, say, governors in the Caribbean itself, or people who run the European fortresses in Western Africa, because every so often you'll get a Baltic ship that sails past and they'll have some kind of argument with it, or they'll be sold something, or they'll give it advice or something like that. So I think what I wanted to achieve with some of my previous research is to sort of broaden the scope of what I'm looking at, and to sort of also kind of in this global history analogy sort of broaden the space beyond the kind of Baltic and look for the Baltic presence in the Caribbean itself, in Western Africa itself, which is possible.
That is nice. Someone is looking at the history of Baltic Sea and has to go to Jamaica to make research. This is very optimistic.
I wish I was given the funding to go to the Caribbean, but it is actually possible not to go to the Caribbean.
But when you are looking at the Baltic culture of the 17th century, so do you have a sense of placing Baltic region again in the mainstream because it was considered peripheric, or is it possible to show that this region was not so far away from the mainstream of the history?
I think it's very possible to sort of bring it into the mainstream of history. A lot of this sort of peripheral notions come from this sort of idea of a global core, global periphery, which often comes from Wallerstein, this economic historian, basically saying that the impetus of global economic activity is coming from Western Europe, basically. But there's been a challenge to that through the decades, basically pointing to a kind of more multicentric idea of looking at agents from the Baltic Sea, for example, who do have influence about what is being produced, what's being written about the world, which kind of makes the Baltic closer to our understanding of processes happening on a large scale across the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, and I think it's very important not to in some ways you can think too macro, and you think of the globe as a huge space, and you think of where all the sort of connections are kind of bundling up, and you think of London, you think of Amsterdam, or Madrid, or whatever, or New York later on. But there's actually a whole lot of interaction happening across many of the different spaces, including the Baltic space, which are actually crucial to the Atlantic. And there's a lot of literature that basically says that the Atlantic world can't really happen without the Baltic.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah,
we contributed with many aspects crucial for success of others.
Yeah, and then that's basically, if you want the sort of my research in a nutshell, it's proving that the sort of the Eastern Baltic, the Baltic Sea, is a global space.
Mm-hmm. But do you see any difference, for example, east-west and south-north? For example, the southern shore of Baltic on opposite to the Sweden, or Denmark, Sweden, and Germany against Baltic Sea and Poland? Or do you have any access of similarity, or is it just kind of a homogeneous world in your period?
Well, you have, of course, many different sort of geopolitical considerations in the 17th century, which split the Baltic Sea up, most notably the antagonism between Sweden and Poland-Lithuania. There's and the antagonism, in fact, by Sweden and Denmark.
A lot of wars.
Lots of wars. Yeah. Yes. So in that way, there is a bit of a split. Certainly, the sort of southern Baltic kind of the interest in the Atlantic kind of congregates around the towns and around the cities, and is not necessarily part of wider state policy. Whereas in Sweden, it is. So the Swedish monarchy and a lot of the Swedish elite, for example, are very, very involved in the Swedish kind of colonial companies.
So in the 7th century, Sweden knew that without ship and without sea, they will not succeed. In Poland, sea is additional. You can go without the focusing on the sea, right? Is it just?
Well, I think in Poland you have a different sort of situation in that you also have the kind of eastern-facing issues of the Ottoman Empire, and
so not by ship, by sea.
Yeah. So not necessarily that sea is unimportant, but it's not the only thing that's going on. Sea for Sweden is hugely important. For Denmark, even more so, because they the monarchy there controls the tolls between this choke point, the Danish Sound is what it's called. So, I mean, something like I forget the actual figure, but something like a quarter of revenue is coming from these maritime tolls.
Oh, optimistic situation when you're well located.
Yeah,
you can earn a lot.
So yeah, it's a lot of it is about positionality, definitely. But I would say as well that there is, in some way, a Baltic world, because you have all these kind of maritime communities of sailors, of merchants, of commercial, of factors, who do sort of circulate around the Baltic and around the North Sea. And many of the sort of merchants in Amsterdam earning very good money from Baltic trades and from Atlantic trades have origins in Gdansk and in Denmark, for instance, and this is kind of partly why I sort of shy away from a kind of again a sort of nationalist, or not nationalist, but nation focused outlook. Because if you look at, the ships, if you say this is a ship from Courland or this is a ship from Sweden or something like that, then but you look at the people who are actually on the ship, they're from Denmark, they're from Gdansk, they're from they're from Amsterdam, they're from Scotland, some of them are from Bordeaux and things like this. It's a huge sort of melting pot, and
cosmopolitan community of people on the sea.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And often it's the case that you just kind of pick up people from port to port who's available, who who you can pay a decent wage.
We know, for example, from the study on Mediterranean, that there was a kind of a Mediterranean language between Arabic and Romanian languages like Italian, French, Spanish, and the melting pot of Mediterranean created a new language known to the people sailing. Did they exist such a language on Baltic Sea, which is internationally recognized, or is it just a mixture, or mainly German?
I think the prior influence of the Hanseatic League really makes Low German so important in this area. The majority of influential merchants in this area will be speaking or writing in Low German. There's a penetration from Dutch, although that's not obviously wildly different.
For example, the names of sails or the technique of building ships probably is heavily indebted to the Dutch tradition.
Definitely,
is it?
Definitely. So you get sort of you get experts coming around from the United Provinces of the Netherlands, ending up in sort of Stockholm and Riga and Karlskrona as a new port in Sweden. You get all sorts of experts, not just in shipbuilding, in fact, but sort of other kind of production techniques. So you have sort of windmills being built in Sweden and this sort of thing, and obviously the Netherlands is very well known for draining fields. So if you need a swamp drained, get somebody from Holland in. This is another way in which there's a circulation of knowledge in the Baltic, and ironworking as well. A lot of the sort of famous ironworking experts are from Wallonia, and then they are hired to come to Sweden to advise, and then suddenly you have Swedish iron experts that then migrate to Russia or to Courland and other places like this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move from the Baltic Sea to your own, let's say, way or background. You are British, and you, as I remember, graduated Cambridge, University City of London, right?
Yes. So I did my bachelor's degree in Cambridge. Then I did my master's at University College London, and then I came back to Cambridge to do my PhD. And
the first question comes: why, as a teenager, did you decide to become a historian?
Oh wow!
Being Brit.
Well, I mean, I've been very, very fascinated by history as a child, frankly, and it helps that my parents are very, very fascinated in history, so they would drag me around.
They are to be blamed.
They would drag me around, castles and places in the UK. And
so the smell of the old. This is what made you interesting in the past. It's a way of exploration. I'm also interested in traveling and such, and the classic phrase, "the past is a current foreign country," it's discovering something new, something entirely different from, sort of in some ways familiar, but in some ways very, very different from your own sort of situation in life. But did you, let's move backward to your teenagers period. Did you focus on history just to explain to yourself who you are, or what does the present means, or is it just a fascination of the child?
I mean, one should never underestimate the fascination of the child just trying to discover something new,
Children are fine in asking questions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, many people ask me why I'm interested in the Baltic states, and the simple answer is because when I was a kid, I just looked at a map and thought, I don't know anything about that place. I want to discover more. And then when you get older, you read books and you try to explain things that are happening in the world, try to make sense of it, and you find all these very, very interesting stories.
So if I get it well, so this is because you did not know enough and you wanted to explore these areas which you found interesting and you did not know from school enough, and this is what you made you a historian.
Yeah, in a short way, that's probably it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any person or event in the history which you would like to see on your own site and or meet a person personally? Is it someone who is intriguing you especially?
What do you mean though by that? Somebody
from the past, for example, some people I would like to meet Napoleon because to talk to him, or is it anyone?
The main guy would be Duke Jakob Kettler of Courland, who is basically the person.
Now people will start googling
yes.
who he was.
Exactly. Please
Let's
do give
make
him a Google.
him fame again.
He is basically the person who decided that he wanted to have New Courland on Tobago, and try to involve this small, relatively kind of under pressure little sort of vassal of Poland-Lithuania, tried to involve it in Atlantic trade. I think you, as a historian, his role is often emphasized too much. I would like to, sometimes talk to his underlings, I guess, his governors and the people who sailed for him, the diplomats who worked for him, just to kind of think, well, actually, what did you think about this? Do you think it's mad, or do you think it's
a
clever,
good opportunity, or is it stupid?
Yeah, but ultimately, it would be very interesting to get into the mind of somebody so ambitious. I think you can sort of bandy around words like, visionary and genius, or maverick, I don't know. Because it seems it seems very outlandish to do that sort of thing. I would hesitate to do that because it seems too celebratory. There's lots of ways in which it failed, and which you could maybe emphasize that doing something a bit more modest might help. But just to get into the head of somebody who looks at this sort of situation and thinks, I can get something out of this, and it will take a huge undertaking. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that would be very, very, very helpful for writing my upcoming books and all this sort of thing. But yeah, I find these people sort of fascinating. To think of
we also
thought
have
processes.
a project in the Faculty of Sociology which is focusing on failure. So maybe this is the case when the important person who just did not manage to get to the point.
I'll be honest, I think it's the way my brain works, but I love reading histories of failure because it seems rather human. I really like reading sources where people get frustrated or annoyed. I don't know, maybe because I am somewhat of a deprecating personality.
In the history of Poland, you will have a lot to read because the failure from one time to another repeats.
Yeah, I am suspicious of looking at the statue of the person with a sword or on horseback, looking very triumphant. So I want to know what problems they had.
Do you find scholarship in Poland? I mean, the academic environment here in University of Warsaw similar to the British or different? And if so, in what way do we differ from Britain?
I think it's a very interesting question, because I think we often all have the same anxieties about, where the funding and where the jobs are coming from. Structurally, I think it is fairly different. For instance, the sort of levels of professional development you might have to go through to sort of... for instance, I think I believe I'm correct in saying that you need to be a professor to teach PhD students. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So we had something called habilitation. So it is just after PhD you have to get another degree, which is called habilitation, and it allows you to be a supervisor of the doctorate students.
So this isn't necessarily a thing in the UK.
Yeah, in British system does not exist.
No,
it's a German tradition.
Yeah. So this is a sort of a difference. I think, if I get it right, I think sort of the public funded and government presence in sort of in the sort of processes of, I mean, just practicals of like claiming your expenses and things like this is more visible than it is in the UK. Not to say that the universities are often public funded in the UK, so it's obviously got a connection with the government, but it seems much more
probably present. Especially now the English academia is facing problems of different kinds, so maybe that's not the best period for British universities.
Yeah, and I shouldn't forget the elephant in the room, which is tuition fees in the UK, which rose to, if you're a bachelor's student in the UK, you have to pay something like, well, you can be charged £9,000 per year to do your bachelor's degree, which was a huge controversial thing in the UK, and is often a point of confusion to people I talk to outside of, in continental Europe especially, for people to say, well, why do you charge so much for higher education? And that has caused some tensions and some problems in the UK. For instance, in my view, it's become a bit more of a sort of customer service relationship between students and teachers and lecturers, which I think is something that UK academics are kind of struggling to get to terms with, or to see how things look in the future. Yeah, but that's a very particularly British thing.
Oh yes, but focusing on Poland, do you like Polish weather, Polish food?
Oh well, I have been very happy with. I certainly like the lifestyle in Poland. As I say, I'm very interested in learning new things and being in a new place, and Polish food treats me well, which was a surprise, I think. Polish weather, fine.
This is in mid-May. We are recording this it's freezing outside, so
I'm fine with this very drab, wet, cold weather.
Okay, seaman.
Maybe in the midst of January it gets a bit less tolerable. I've heard that in decades gone by it's been much worse. But yeah, ultimately I can cope with it. I'm very impressed, by Poland, just by the welcome you can get, the new things that you can discover. It's I very much enjoyed traveling from place to place in Poland, and I think this is a very key part of being sort of an early career academic, especially somebody who doesn't work specifically in their own country, as I don't. It's essential to sort of travel around and hear new perspectives. And
as you explore past, you can explore only territorial, in geographical way, different zones.
Yeah. And I can go to Gdansk and see. See things.
John, where do you see yourself in 10 years from now? In optimistic scenario.
Optimistic terms, yes.
The best scenario for yours.
I think there's always a tendency when asked to make a sort of slight pessimistic groan.
There are always space for failure.
So I can say what I hope, and what I hope is that I can get some sort of reasonably secure position, that it doesn't last 6 months or 1 year or whatever. And what I really hope is that that I can continue sort of raising this awareness of global history where you wouldn't expect, and sort of considering the Eastern Baltic Sea as a global space, and to look at the wider connections and networks between the Baltic Sea and the Atlantic. That's what I hope that I would still be working on in 10 years' time, and that there would also be interested enough people there to listen, interested enough people to pay me money to do that, and that sort of there's there's a stable kind of financial backing in sort of academia to do that. And I'd hope that I'd be sort of in a position to do a lot of travelling associated with that. It might be the case that I'm based in the United Kingdom just for family reasons, which is sort of the downside of travelling everywhere. You're not necessarily securely located. So in 10 years, I'd hope, I'll be 41 then. I guess I would like some sort of stability. Yeah.
Finally.
Yes.
Okay, so we cross fingers that you manage to achieve the goal. I encourage all the listeners to look at John's publications. We will try to put down the podcast to link information about the current ones.
Yeah, if you Google John Freeman Courland, it will definitely be me.
Okay, there will, and cross finger that everything goes well, and failures only on 17th century project of colonialism.
Yes, I'm not interested in my own failure.
No, I wish you success. Thank you, John, for the conversation.
Thank you very much.